Good evening and welcome to the Canberra AWS User Group for February 2021. I'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land we're presenting from, the Ngunnawal tribe, and pay my respects to their elders past and present. My name is Brian Farnhill, and as always, we're back again, whole new year, another 10 meetups that we'll be running throughout the year, and looking to kick off with a bang. JJ and I are moderately around how we do this after 3 months off, but we'll pull this off as I look at him frantically playing around with my setup at the producer desk that I realise I screwed something up on. But it's going to be fine. Let's get into it. So this month we're going to go through our usual run through of what's been new in AWS through February and talk about some of the stuff that's been going on. We'll talk about training updates and things that have been released. We'll go through some white paper releases and then into a very, very small Reinvent Recap. And I say that because Reinvent went for 3 weeks through December and there was a ton of announcements. So we're not going to cover everything, but JJ and I thought let's pull together a list of things that we think are worth talking about with a Canberra audience, given that this is the Canberra user group, and that's sort of the focus of where we're going. So, as always, I am still plugging our YouTube channel. Every single session we're presenting hits that YouTube channel. So if you want to get anything that we've presented from March last year, which is when we went virtual and went online, every single session is there in full for you to catch on demand at your leisure. I would really like to rename that URL as well. So get me to 100 subscribers, people. Please like and subscribe. That's the thing I didn't think I'd find myself saying too often, but here we are. So speaking of feature updates, it's been 3 months since we had a session, so there's a rather large number to play around with here. So since we came together last, there were 479 new services and feature updates to AWS. So breaking that out month by month, we saw 276 updates in December, which is a direct result of Reinvent. 118 through January, and as of Monday when I ran these numbers, 88 coming through for February so far, which for those playing along with my visuals, because charts are a thing, looks a little bit like this. So you can see a couple of very big months through November and December last year with Reinvent 2020. So plenty of stuff to have a look at. Now, in terms of what's new and things to pay attention to, a couple of things relating to Sydney, specifically in the Sydney region. The AWS Graviton 2 M6Gs, C6Gs, R6Gs are now available in a bunch of extra regions, and the M6GDs, C6GDs, and R6GDs are now available in more regions. Now, the specific element that I want to bring your attention to here is the GD instances are now in Sydney. So these are really, really good if you want to look at that storage throughput per vCPU and what you can do with storage on the Graviton 2 processors. So Graviton 2, if you're not familiar with it, is a processor that we've developed to be the most cost-performant, efficient processor in the cloud. So you get the best cost performance of any CPU in the cloud. So really great for a lot of different types of workloads. And now we can go through and use more of those instance types in Sydney. The second update relating to Sydney is that AWS Direct Connect now supports native 100 gig per second dedicated connections at select locations. Luckily for us, one of those select locations is the Equinix location in Sydney. So if you'd like to get a 100 gig Direct Connect connection, as opposed to the previous dedicated options of 1 or 10, that's now an option for even more throughput on a single Direct Connect connection. Speaking of things that are coming to Australia but not to Sydney, here's a relatively big one. We've announced a new AWS region that's coming to Australia. We'll be opening a region in Melbourne in the second half of 2022. So it's a full AWS region. It's going to have 3 availability zones in exactly the same way as Sydney has 3 availability zones as well. And this is going to open up heaps of options for customers who need to run region redundant workloads but need to keep them inside of Australia. So this is a massive investment, massive amount of infrastructure, and is going to mean great things for all of our customers. And I am really, really excited to see this one come together. There's a great blog post that talks through some of what we're doing there, but keep an eye out for that in the back half of next year as the Melbourne region comes online. Now, other things that have come out through February that warrant having a bit of a chat about. Amazon S3 now supports Private Link. So Private Link, for those who aren't familiar, is a mechanism to present a private endpoint in your VPCs for accessing specific AWS services. So rather than needing an internet gateway in your VPC to get out to the internet to communicate with AWS services, You can keep the network private and not have an internet gateway and still access these services directly through these endpoints. Now, the difference here is that previously AWS S3, Amazon S3, had a gateway endpoint, which you could still use in much the same way, but it behaved differently to the interface ones. With the new interface endpoints, you can route traffic there from a bunch of different places. So this will be useful for the on-prem story. So if you've got an on-prem network that's connected via a site-to-site VPN, for example, or Direct Connect, and you want to go to a private endpoint for S3 through there, now you can do that with these interface endpoints. They can live side by side with the gateway ones as well, so you can continue to use both while you migrate from one to the other. Next one is the Amazon CloudFront Security Savings Bundle. So this is a new offering that's around Cloudfront, which is our edge location content delivery network, where you can essentially commit to prepay for a level of Cloudfront consumption, and as a result of that, we will give you credits towards using our AWS WAF along with Cloudfront. So what this means is that I can run a public website, I can put a WAF on there to make sure that I'm secure using appropriate rules, and I can optimize my spend by looking to essentially pre-purchase a level of commitment there to bundle in some of those WAF savings by default. So this is a really great way to start pulling WAF into a workload that you might already be running and wanting to enhance the security of. AWS Cloud9, which is our developer IDE that lives in your web browser essentially, has added support for visual source control integration for Git. So previously, if you were using Git source control through Cloud9, you would do so with the command line. I would run Git commands like git push, git pull, git commit, those kinds of things. Now, if you're like me and more often than not forget anything outside of those 3 specific Git commands, there's a visual mechanism there for me that I can use by clicking and telling it to sync and doing commits through there without relying on the command line. So there's a whole new Git experience there built into the Cloud9 IDE. Speaking of AWS WAF that I mentioned before there's now a new support in WAF for JSON parsing of content when you're doing inspection. So this is really important because it means that I can use the WAF now to filter out requests based on bad inputs before they get to my APIs and my backend. I can define rules at WAF to filter that traffic out sooner and mitigate the amount of load that I'm having to handle in the backend. So this is good for security and good for performance of your applications. Amazon RDS now publishes events for multi-AZ deployments. See, 3 months off, I'm totally winning at this. Now, what this feature is it'll provide notifications to you through SNS when RDS is doing specific failover activities, and there's 3 or 4 different events that it'll publish out to you. What this lets you do is go and handle gracefully something in your application while the database is failing over. Typically, an RDS failover will take in the order of magnitude of a couple of minutes, depending on your particular configuration and database engine. So what you could do here is maybe update a flag in your configuration to say we're read-only while something is failing over because you'll go to a read replica, or change something about the way your application is running until the failover is completed. This essentially lets me make a more automated and more clean experience for my users of my application, and I still get that automated experience in terms of failover and management of the database. All right, last 3 things I'm going to talk about in terms of what's new this month. Lambda now has support for Node.js 14. So if you're a Node.js developer working in the serverless space, version 14 brings performance enhancements, security enhancements, and there's a few other language-specific things in there as well. So if you want the latest and greatest in terms of your Lambdas, you can get out there with Node 14 now. Systems Manager, Patch Manager specifically is what I want to talk about next. And this has added a feature where there's now additional hooks I can use when rolling out patches across a fleet of my instances. So previously I could define maintenance windows that would control when patching would happen, but now I can also have a hook to run a particular script or piece of code before the patch is executed as well as after, which means I can check things like prerequisites and making sure that my environment is up to date and healthy so that I can apply the patch more successfully. And then afterwards, I can also do a health check to say, did that patch succeed? Is there anything else I need to do? And if so, take an action to go and remediate whatever went wrong. Lastly, we've added support for the Amazon VPC traffic mirroring on selected non-Nitro based instances. So traffic mirroring is a mechanism you can use to take traffic that would normally go to a single endpoint on an EC2 instance and mirror it to a second one. So this is really useful for things like packet inspection and those kinds of things. But previously you had to be using the Nitro instances to be able to get this functionality. Now we've added support for a range of non-Nitros. Not all of them, but there's a bunch of them in there. So if the packet inspection and those kinds of features are important to you, but the instance types was a blocker, go back and have a look at the support for these instance types and see if that addresses what you're looking for, so you can use this new feature. Okay, what's new in the world of training this month? As always, AWS.training is the go-to place to find all sorts of on-demand and classroom training for AWS material. A couple of new courses that were released this month. One new one on digital training for AWS partners on end-user computing and machine learning. So a couple of courses there that are worth checking out if you're an AWS partner. And the second one was a new digital curriculum around managing Amazon. Oh, excuse me. I was holding on to that for a good minute. There's a new one around managing Amazon S3. So again, if training materials are your thing, then you can go in and get those from AWS.training, as well as a full range of classroom and on-demand training courses. Okay, and the last thing I'll run you through before I hand over to JJ to kick off the main session is around white papers that have been released and updated this month. So the first one was the disaster recovery of workloads on AWS. So this is a new white paper this month, and if you're interested in disaster recovery and business continuity, is worth a read. The second two, the scale-out computing on AWS and the decoupled serverless scheduler, these are both related to HPC, so high-performance compute workloads, and have both been updated from their previous versions. So if HPC is an area that you're playing in, definitely go and have a look at those updated white papers. So on that note, I'm going to sit down for a little bit and hand over to JJ. We've got some technical problems apparently though, so we're going to go and work on that, and we'll be back in 2 minutes with JJ. Stay with us.
Hi everybody, apologies for the brief break. Turns out the problem was likely PEBCAC for yours truly, so yeah, my fault, apologies. But welcome, so this is going to be a Reinvent Recap. As Brian said at the start, Reinvent's a really big event, it's really exciting. We had literally hundreds of announcements as you saw in Brian's graph earlier. What we've done is we've tried to curate some of the content that we find more useful for the customers Brian and I are working with day to day here in Canberra. The way we'll structure it is we're going to start with some of the foundational AWS services, so things like you're familiar with, like the compute and the storage, and we're going to build up into some of the higher level services as we go. So there's a lot of content to go on. I've got some links in the back of it to go and find more content, and if your favourite announcement isn't in here, we apologise in advance. So let's get cracking. So from compute point of view, it wouldn't be a reInvent if we didn't hear a bunch of stuff about compute, and I was not disappointed at all this year. So, but before we get into that, a brief recap. So AWS and the AWS Cloud have definitely the broadest and deepest compute platform. So as you can see, we've got instances of for all different purposes with different capabilities and different options that you can add to it as well. And when you put all of those together, you actually got the choice of over 350 different types of instance, which means that you've got something to run pretty much every single workload that you have today in an optimal way in AWS. There is one logo in there that is definitely new and very exciting, and that's the Apple logo in options. We'll talk a bit more about that soon. But before we get to the actual compute instances themselves, from an infrastructure point of view, AWS Outposts announced they've got two new sizes. So as well as the 42 RU racks that are available in Australia now, we've announced that there's going to be a 2 RU and a 1 RU version of Outposts. And these are ideal for workloads that require low latency access to on-premises applications or data processing. And they're designed for the places with more limited physical space. So think your branch office, maybe your medical facility, or some sort of scenario like that. And they are, and so they'll let you run all the Amazon services that you expect on Outposts, and they will be available in the in coming. It was a preview this time, an announcement this time. But from a compute point of view, you heard Brian mention a bunch of the Graviton 2 processors. I won't recover what Graviton 2 is, but one of the announcements was the CGN. And so this is an instance type that not only uses Graviton, but it also has very high network bandwidth and network performance with support for the fabric adapter. And so for some of my customers who run things like big security appliances that are very heavy on both CPU and network, this is a great fit. It means you get lots and lots of networking performance, lots of CPU, as well as running it in a very cost-effective manner. So this is GA, still coming to Sydney, as are the next couple as well, but keep an eye out for that one, because for a number of my customers, it'll make a difference to the workloads you're running today. Next is the R5B. The reason the B is interesting here is that it's the instance with the highest IOPS for block storage in the cloud. The big number here is 7,500 megabytes per second maximum through to EBS, which is a huge amount of throughput to EBS, and 260,000 IOPS as well, which is it's a big number. So if you've got big database servers or servers that just need to push a lot of data through to EBS, this is a great one to watch out for. And again, previously some customers have had to over-provision their instance size to be able to get the throughput to EBS. So now you might be able to reevaluate and just do the same thing in a more cost-effective manner. And the last of the typical instances I'll talk through is the D series. So the D3s have come out, and if you're running D2 instances today for some of your like high-scale file systems or something, these are worth watching out for. They've got up to 336 terabytes of storage locally, and they've got 45% higher disk throughput. So these are really high-performant instances, and as you can see in the last sentence, they've got up to 80% lower cost per terabyte than the D2, so a really cost-effective upgrade when it's available here. And I mentioned it before, but the Mac instances were announced at reInvent. And so if Apple development is your thing, this allows you to run in EC2 OS X on Apple hardware. It's connected to our Nitro system, and so you get all the benefits of EC2, so you get you don't have to manage the infrastructure, you don't have to worry about all that sort of administrative stuff. And what you can actually do is just focus on writing code and running that. You can get consistency in your build pipelines, so you can have, no matter what platform you're building for, you can now do the development in AWS and have a consistent DevOps pipeline experience. And you also get a lot of familiar integration with other AWS services. So again, a really great if Apple development's your thing. Now, from a storage point of view, storage had a huge reInvent. There was a whole storage day just before reInvent. We've covered some of the stuff from that in the last reInvent, for those that remember that many months ago, for the last user group. The first I wanted to cover, though, is from EBS. EBS IO2 Block Express is a preview of the first SAN built for the cloud. So this is for like 4 times higher throughput than the IO2 disks themselves, and they are for your largest, most IO-intensive workloads. So think your biggest SAP HANA, your biggest Oracle databases, SQL Server databases again, and like SAS Analytics. So they're really, really powerful. Anything that you're running on a high IO SAN today, absolutely worth having a look at for this. It's currently in preview in US East, but will expand. Now, one final note on these, it's launched with a fairly limited set of functionality, but some of the additional SAN capabilities you'd expect, like IO fencing and things like that, they will be coming in the coming months. So it's not done. As we want to do, we will release and we'll keep adding functionality quickly. The other one is from storage is another EBS capability. It's our new general purpose SSDs, GP3. So these are, most of my customers run most of their workloads with GP2 today. And what GP3 gives them is a couple of key advantages. One, it's cheaper per gigabyte month, and also it allows you to provision storage and IOPS separately from each other. And so if you have, if you've previously been through an exercise of managing IOPS to an GP2 volume, you'll know that you've got to provision more storage to get more IO. And with GP3, that's no longer true. So I have some customers that have excessively provisioned GP2 volumes that they can now upgrade to GP3 and potentially significantly reduce the cost of the volume and still get the IO performance that they need out of GP2 disk, the GP3 disks. So really interesting. Some data points for it because, as Brian says, we love data here. Here's some comparison points between GP3 and GP2. A couple of stats to call out here. One of them's not on the table, which is the minimum IOPS you get provisioned on a GP3 is 3,000 IOPS, but the maximum throughput is significantly higher to a GP3 volume. And so if you've got big GP3 volumes you can now run much higher throughput than you could on GP2 storage. And again, it's a little bit cheaper as well. Networking. So as an old school infrastructure guy, I probably get disproportionately excited about things like networking releases, but there was a couple of really great releases for us in the field this reInvent. The first of those, and one of my favorite releases for reInvent, is the AWS Network Firewall, which is a cloud native firewall. So what this gives you is a fully managed firewall running in AWS that scales automatically. We manage the infrastructure for you, and it has a highly flexible rule engine that you can develop custom rules for to match your workloads. And it also allows you to centrally manage policies as you need to through the use of Firewall Manager. And lastly, because it's in the cloud, you pay for what you use. And so it's very, very cost effective. At a glance, sort of at a shared responsibility model, as a customer, you'll define the policies. You'll also deploy and manage the policies in the different accounts or VPCs that you're deploying it to. And you'll also make use of Firewall Manager to do that. But AWS takes care of a whole bunch of other stuff that you would normally have to do with firewalls. So we manage the infrastructure for you. We provide you with very, very high throughput out of these. So more than 45 gigabit connections through firewalls, which is quite significant. Now, there's a couple of technical terms in here around zonal affinity. What that means is that if you talk to two instances via the AWS Network Firewall, and both of those instances are in the same availability zone, it will keep the traffic in that availability zone so that you don't pay cross AZ charges. And it's highly resilient with a 4.9s SLA as well. I won't drain this slide of all the network firewall features. There's some really, really key ones, though, that I'd call out. So from a point of view of the rule set, there's a whole bunch of different rules that you can create yourself, and it uses open source standards to do so. From a visibility and reporting point of view, it actually integrates with all of the patterns that you'd expect an AWS service. So you can use CloudWatch logs, S3, Kinesis. So patterns that you'll be familiar with in AWS are all supported here, and you can get full network flow logs as well. From a deployment point of view, there's a couple of standard approaches for the firewall. There's both a centralized model where you can pair it up with your transit gateway and provide filtering of both east-west and north-south traffic. And there's also a distributed model where you can provide a firewall endpoint in each of your VPCs and still manage your policy centrally, but not have that single point. And for different customers, one of those approaches will work for you, but it's a great capability. And a final note on that, there's still definitely a place for partner firewalls, so things like Palo Altos or checkpoints definitely still have a place in your network architecture. The release gateway load balancer that came out just before reInvent is worth going and understanding, and we had a session on that just at the end of last year from one of our colleagues, Steve, on what deployment of those looks like. So if you have capabilities that you still need in your partner firewalls, strongly recommend you check that out, and still consider AWS Network Firewall as a part of a defense in-depth strategy. Moving from the firewall to something that is, I think this is vastly underrated when I talk to a bunch of people about this. So the Amazon VPC Reachability Analyzer. What this allows you to do is check your configuration to make sure it actually does what you think it's going to do. And so you can say, how can I get from, can I talk from this instance to this other instance in this other in another availability zone, and it will go and check your configuration. It won't send any packets, and it will assess whether or not the configuration in your environment supports it. So this is really interesting, and it has a few key use cases. Obviously, troubleshooting connectivity issues is the obvious one. So this instance can't talk to here. You can put it into the reachability analyzer and find out that perhaps a security group rule is blocking it or not allowing it, or that there's a network ACL or something in the way that's not allowing it. In addition to that, though, you can actually ensure the configuration matches your intent. So as you're building your network, you can check that you've applied your least privilege, what you believe your least privilege model is, and then you can actually test it before you go and build workloads and do all of that. So it allows your team that's managing your network and to be able to start testing these things with and have a high degree of confidence that when you arrive and deploy your workload, you're ready to go. And the last one is it's automated. So this tool is built off some of the great work out of our automated reasoning group. I could geek out about them for quite a while, but if that sort of stuff interests you and proofs of things like that interest you, definitely worth looking up the automated reasoning group and having a listen to our podcast episode that talked to them as well. Moving on from networks to more of SysOps land, we've had a release called AWS Cloud Shell, which as a cloud architect at AWS, I love. Like, this is a great, easy way to get access to the AWS CLI. And so what you can do from the console is launch a CLI shell in the console, and it has a couple of really neat benefits. So it is a CLI environment. It's always up to date. It's always patched. You don't have any administration, no installation, nothing to manage on that side. But it also gives you a 1 gigabyte home drive for persistence. So when you leave the session and come back later, all of that good work that you've got or anything you've saved there is still there. So it's a super simple way to do it, and literally a click gets you started in the console with an AWS CLI in the account you're in. It's a really great little feature. And it looks like this. So just like a CLI running in a console. So a couple of points about this that you can't tell immediately from this. It supports all the things like lights and dark modes. You can change font sizes. You can create tabs, and you can also upload and download files. So quite usable, definitely worth having a look and checking out and figuring out if it's going to be useful in your environment. I strongly suspect it will be. Moving on from exciting things like that to everyone's favourite topic, auditing. Everyone loves a good audit. Now, in that sense, what we've released is something called AWS Audit Manager. And as someone who's previously worked in operations, I love the idea of this service. And I love what it provides our customers. What it does is it allows you to enable your internal governance and security and risk teams to be able to get reports and compliance status much, much faster and much more easily in your environment. It allows a bunch of pre-built customizable frameworks to help you build out those reports, and then it will automate the collection of those reports for you. And so as you're going through and doing this, it will give those reports to your compliance teams much faster. And so that, as an ops person, makes your life way more efficient, and it also makes them a lot happier as well, which is a great place to be. Now, I am not a risk management person, but apparently it supports the third line of defence for risk management, and you can read a bit about that there. So this is more around the independent assurance of risk assessment. So if risk management's your thing, you can read up a bit more on that, and you can also see where our different services play in the different lines of risk management. Don't talk to me about it though, I'm clearly not a risk management specialist. But I can talk to you about the benefits of Audit Manager. The idea of being able to map your AWS usage into the controls and being able to automate the collection of evidence for them, to me, in my operations life, would have been a huge time saver. So I'm probably disproportionately excited about this service. I think it's potentially a real time saver for a bunch of people. And as I said, one of the key benefits is just being able to produce those reports quickly, and it also provides evidence integrity to those reports as well, which is super helpful. Now, One thing about it at this stage, for those of you who have a Canberra mindset or an Australian security mindset, you'll notice that the key acronym you were looking for is not in this list yet. So at launch, we don't have IRAP in the tool yet. However, it does have CIS and it does have a bunch of best practices related to Dynamo, IAM, S3. So there is a number of things that will definitely overlap with your IRAP assessments and will still provide you with a vastly, well, I would argue, a much greater benefit in preparing for your audits. And I'd also point out that it also can help with your software licensing as well, another area I'm not brilliant at. Moving on from that to databases. So Babelfish for Postgres was one of the most interesting releases for mine on in all of reInvent. What Babelfish is a translation layer that allows applications that talk to Microsoft SQL servers to talk to Aurora Postgres. And so what it gives you is an additional endpoint on your Aurora Postgres that speaks native Microsoft SQL. And so what it's designed to be is an accelerant for your migration. And what it means is that as you're migrating your apps into AWS, you can use our database migration service to help migrate the database into Aurora, but your application code can still talk to the Microsoft SQL endpoint, so your Babelfish endpoint, running in the Aurora Postgres cluster. And that means that you don't have to remediate and refactor all that application code prior to migrating. So it's a real accelerant for those migrations. A couple of really exciting things about it. We're going to open source it under the Apache 2 license, so it will be available for everyone. I had something else that's completely forgotten. So that's okay. We'll just move on. And at that point, I'm going to hand the mic back to Brian to continue with the second half. So give me a couple of seconds.
Alrighty, cool. Hi, I'm back, just like I said I would. So let's kick on through the rest of the things we wanted to cover off. And the one I wanted to start with here, being the developer specialist in our team, was Amazon DevOps Guru. So essentially what DevOps Guru is designed to be is a machine learning based service that makes it really easy for both developers and operators to detect issues in their applications and to provide recommendations that will help you remediate those quicker. So the scenario that we're really looking to address here is that in modern applications running in the cloud, we've often got a lot of data, lots of CloudWatch metrics and logs and health monitors, all sorts of things. So trying to figure out where things are correlated and are related issues or are separate issues can often be challenging. So having some machine learning based power over the top of that to help speed up that remediation and recommendation of results can help you get up and running again quicker. So the main things to know about DevOps Guru is that, first of all, you don't need to know anything to do with machine learning. In fact, it's super simple to configure. It's a few mouse clicks in the console and you are off and running. So very, very easy to get going. It can automatically detect those operational issues for you. So it's aware of a whole lot of different metrics around the resource types that it can monitor, so it can bring them all in automatically. So you don't need to go and tell it specific details about which Dynamo tables and those kinds of things. It's designed to speed up resolution by making things really, really quick in terms of a recommended action to take when it detects an issue. So say, for example, if it's monitoring a DynamoDB table and it sees, oh, the threshold of your write capacity is being reached and I'm having to throttle requests. And I can see that recently there was a change made to that table in CloudFormation. You should go back and roll that change back because I'm seeing a correlation between those two things. So this is going to speed up the time to root cause analysis and figuring that out to be able to go and resolve your issues. It's scalable. So it's an as-a-service kind of offering. You don't need to provision additional infrastructure or servers or anything to run DevOps Guru on. You pay for it as you use it, and you move on from there. And again, it's really good at reducing noise. So if you've got multiple alarms that are related to a single issue, it will aggregate them together for you. So say, for example, I have an API gateway with a Lambda function behind that, and that Lambda is trying to read from DynamoDB. And suddenly I've under-provisioned Dynamo, I'm getting throttled read requests. I might have an alarm on Dynamo that goes off, I'll have an alarm on Lambda that goes off because it's not sending results back, and I might have an alarm on 500 errors from the API gateway. DevOps Guru will see see all of these go off at the same time and be able to see that they are connected and bring them into a single incident so that I'm not necessarily dealing with 3 fires. Rather than that, I can just look at 1. So in terms of getting started with DevOps Guru, it's super simple. You go into the console, you say you want to enable it per region for every CloudFormation stack in that account or for specific CloudFormation stacks. Once you've done that, it'll go through and analyze the resources in that stack. There's a list of supported resources. Not everything is on there yet, but there are a lot of really common ones there. And after that, it'll just start telling you when things are going on. You've also got the option, if you're using the Systems Manager service in terms of Ops Center, of having it automatically raising ops items for you as a notification mechanism. So that way you can integrate it into an end-to-end operations process to streamline what you're doing from a monitoring perspective. So a couple of things just to take you through some screenshots of what it looks like. So at a glance, you've got a bunch of health metrics to do with the individual CloudFormation stacks. So you'll see what metrics it's looking at. You'll see the stacks and any current insights. And you can filter it down per CloudFormation stack. So the CloudFormation stack really is the core of what's going on in DevOps Guru. But you can see here in the screenshot, there's 3 different stacks, all of which have got alarms on them at the moment. And it gives you a bit of an idea of what that looks like. As we start to drill down into it, though, things get a little bit more interesting. So this concept of insights is what's being driven in terms of the output of DevOps Guru. And so it can give me things like reactive insights, such as your alarms have gone off and things have gone down. But it can also give you proactive insights as well, such as I'm monitoring free disk space on that EBS volume, and that looks like it's going to be bad. I'm going to raise an insight and tell you to go and fix that before it becomes a problem. Again, leveraging machine learning to look at the entire CloudFormation stack to understand what's going on. So you can also see in the screenshot here, there's like a timeline of the different elements that have been raised in an incident here and when they were critical from. So you've got this inbuilt ability to see the end-to-end view of an incident and when particular elements were causing trouble. Then lastly, we get into the insights. So if you scroll down a little further on that screen we were just looking at, it says these are the things that we think you should do to remediate that issue. So things like going through and rolling back a change or giving you links to documentation that might be related to the type of metric behavior we're seeing. All of this is automated and again based on that machine learning, designed to make it quicker for you to figure out what's wrong and resolve those issues. So that's DevOps Guru. Next, another one near and dear to my heart, AWS Lambda had a number of different updates, and I wanted to take you through a few of them really, really quickly. The first one is the support for container images for Lambda functions. So this is designed to be a packaging mechanism to make it easier to prepare complex Lambda environments that will still run inside of Lambda. So the common question that I've had in response to this is customers saying, great, I can just take my existing container and dump it in Lambda and we're migrated. That's not quite how it works. We still need to be able to do things like invoke a specific entry point from code to say, here's the handler that runs, and then you still run within the single instance per invocation, so you might have multiple containers running in parallel for each individual instance. So there are things to consider in terms of how you migrate from containers to Lambda. What this does do, though, is it makes it really easy to bring in complex dependencies. So if you think about things that you might have been doing previously with layers and using multiple layers to package dependencies up, specifically around scenarios like bring your own runtime, or if you've got particular componentry like telemetry engines and other things that you wanted to bring into Lambda, you can now take a container image and use that to be able to run your code from there, as opposed to trying to inject those elements with layers. So this makes it easier to bundle up complex environments inside of Lambda. The process is very straightforward. You use the standard Docker or OCI images up to 10 gigabytes, so you can have quite a large image there. And you, from there, go and use all the standard tools for running Lambda. So you can also then look at things like third-party images and bringing in things that will really help you improve what you can do inside of Lambda. The next thing about Lambda that's changed is the granularity of the billing. Now, this was already pretty good. Lambda would charge you per 100 milliseconds of execution time. The customers said to us, hey, that's great, but you know what would be better? per millisecond. And so that's what the team have done. So now if you previously had a Lambda function that would execute for 70 or 80 milliseconds, it would round up to the nearest 100. So you would pay for 100 milliseconds despite the fact that you only used 70. Now you pay per millisecond for what's running inside of Lambda. So this automatically took effect from the December billing cycle, so it just sorted itself out. And that basically means that your Lambdas will probably cost less than what they already did, which in all likelihood was probably not much to begin with. But a really great cost optimization mechanism there for Lambda. And the last Lambda one I want to talk about is the increase in size for Lambda functions. So previously, you were able to allocate 3 gigabytes of RAM to a Lambda function as a maximum. Now, this also corresponded with an amount of CPU that you would get. So if I assigned 128 megabytes, which is the minimum, I would get the minimum amount of CPU time along with that. 3 gigabytes would give me more CPU. Now I can go up to 10 gigabytes of memory. This correlates to 6 full vCPUs being attached to your Lambda function, giving you a lot of compute power for single invocation work. So if you're looking at a custom container image with some complex tooling to go and run something that still only takes 15 minutes to run but could use a lot of compute power, now you can dial that all the way up to 10 gig, get those 6 vCPUs, and run a lot of different types of workloads that previously might not have been suitable for Lambda. So again, bringing serverless to a broader range of workloads through a number of these different feature updates. So the next one I want to take you through is the Amazon Eks Distro. So essentially what Eks Distro is a release of the Kubernetes distro that we use in EKS. So you can then take this and install it on your own hardware. So you can put it on your own EC2 instances, you could run it on-prem, you could run it in a different cloud if that was where you really wanted to go. So there's a number of benefits to what's going on here. So you're getting a lot of the updates and things that we add to be able to make EKS the reliable AWS integrated platform that it is today. So you don't need to take straight from the standard Kubernetes engine. You can take what's running inside of EKS and use that. So that brings with it security patches and tooling that is baked into what we do with EKS. We also backport patches to supported versions of EKS. And essentially, you'll be able to go and build this yourself as well. Like the builds will be completely reproducible and you'll be able to create them yourself and go and run your own Kubernetes platform. Now, this ties into another thing that's going to get announced, well, has been announced, but will be released later this year. So EKS Distro is available now. If you want to take this and go and run EKS on your own infrastructure, you can do that today. The thing that's coming with this is EKS Anywhere. And this is where, if you've looked at things like how we run RDS on VMware, for example, you still control it through the AWS control plane, but it's running on other infrastructure. EKS Anywhere is the same concept. So you can run EKS on your own infrastructure. For example, if you've got it on-prem for latency reasons or particular information security requirements, but still manage it through the AWS console with all the same tooling and features you would expect through there, and leverage that as the management mechanism for what's going on in that EKS cluster, which is running on-prem. So EKS Anywhere is going to get it released in the second half of this year. So keep an eye out for that if you're interested. But a couple of things to call out about it. So is the EKS distro a fork of the upstream Kubernetes? The answer is no. It is still the same thing that we do with EKS, where we run that upstream Kubernetes as the base of what we do, and we build some stuff onto it to be able to run EKS. So things that you get with EKS distro, you get upstream Kubernetes. So this is particularly important for things like compatibility and getting new features through and those sorts of things. You get etcd and etcd control. You get core DNS in there. You get the upstream CNI, and you'll get the CSI sidecar container in there as well. Things you don't get in EKS distro is EKS control. So that's going to come along with the EKS Anywhere. So you'll have the mechanisms to control that with that feature. You don't get the AWS official CNIs and CSIs. So this is where you'll go back to the upstream components for those. And the Amazon controllers for Kubernetes, which is some of the AWS server-side sort of specific things that we run inside of EKS. These were not shipping into the on-prem product because they're not really relevant because you're not running inside of AWS in that particular environment. But yeah, if Kubernetes is your thing, worth checking that one out. Now, the next one is a brand new service that I wanted to talk about, and it's AWS Proton. So to explain what Proton's sort of reason for being is, I wanted to pitch a bit of a story to you here. So microservices is a concept where we break an application up into lots of individual chunks that can be deployed and updated individually. It makes a lot of sense from a DevOps perspective for agility. And you might start with a diagram that looks a little bit like this in terms of your architecture. I'm going to have a storefront, and that storefront's going to have a service for inventory. It's going to have a service for checkout, and there'll be some data stores behind that, maybe a third-party thing. Now, in reality, there's probably a lot more going on in my application than just that. There's things like the DNS, there's things like load balancing, there's things like my code deployment pipelines, my monitoring and alarms. Things like this is where we start to overlap with the things infrastructure people want versus the things developers want kind of conversation. And so this is where we wanted to try to come up with something to help address concerns on both sides of that fence. So your typical infrastructure people are going to be looking for enforcing standards and making sure that everything is up to date. Whereas developers also want to make sure that they can provision things quickly. They want self-service and they want things to be transparent in terms of how updates are being managed and rolled out so that they can be empowered to add value and features themselves. So this is where Proton sort of comes into it. So Proton is really about taking both sides of this and merging it together into a single service. So from an infrastructure perspective, you're going to be able to do things like define and publish infrastructure templates that are based on CloudFormation into a central library. So you can come up with some common patterns that those developers can use. The developers will say, great, I'm building that type of app. They'll grab that template out and they'll start building against that. And it's going to speed up the time for them to get moving because they'll be able to use templates that have things like a CI/CD pipeline and monitoring and DNS and the other core infrastructure elements that the infrastructure people care about already baked into what they're doing. But they still get to get moving quickly and in a way that is really compliant. So it's going to be able to include all of those sorts of things. So realistically, this service gives me a bit of a mix between both. So the goal here is to help customers quickly and confidently adopt best practices and new features for things like containers and serverless. So the question I get asked from customers all the time is, we've got an infrastructure team who need to manage these things, and I've got developers who need to manage those things. It's one thing to be able to rock up and say, well, you can all work on the same CDK project or CloudFormation template or whatever it is, but the two don't necessarily work to the same sort of cadence and to the same sorts of goals. Being able to take something like Proton and put it into an environment where the infrastructure team wants to work in a particular way and the developers can work in that way helps you sort of marry that up. So, this might not be something that every single customer will grab and use, but customers that have got those clear lines between infrastructure teams and developer teams might find that this is a really useful tool for being able to enable both of those scenarios. The goal is to be able to enable those rapid and consistent deployments of your cloud-based platforms. So we want to make it fast for the developers, but we're going to make sure that standards are baked into everything we do. So it allows the infrastructure teams to focus on deciding on what the best architectures are for the business in terms of how its uptime and DNS and those sorts of things are going to be built into these application templates, and developers can then grab it and run with it. Now, it's in a public preview at the moment, so it's a really great time to grab it and provide us some feedback so that we can shape it ahead of general availability. Things it does right now in terms of the public preview, so you can create those templates based on CloudFormation. You can go through and deploy environments and services based on those templates. You can connect it to Code Pipeline to do your CI/CD processes, and you can update templates and upgrade your deployed environments. So if I create V1 of a template and a developer goes and uses it, and then the infrastructure team publish V1.1, then that app can be updated to the new version of the template without the developers having to specifically get involved. So you can do all of that with what's in the product today. In terms of the roadmap, the team shares a public roadmap. It's on GitHub, so you can get out there and find what they're working on and what's being prioritized. But things like health monitoring being inbuilt is on that list, support for third-party tooling. So in particular, if you want to use a different CI/CD engine, different observability components, different infrastructure as code engines, these are all on the roadmap. Automated tagging of resources based on template level rules. So everything with this template gets tagged like that. This will help you with things like config rules and permissions management. Multi-account support is one customers have asked for loud and clear from the start of the preview, and we'll be working on that before general availability. And lastly, access control to individual templates. So that's what's on the roadmap for Proton. So if that sounds like it could be interesting for your organization, absolutely get in there and check that one out. Now, Sagemaker, as our machine learning platform, it got a ton of updates. There was a whole machine learning keynote, and it was raining Sagemaker features. We could talk for hours and hours just about those things that came out for Sagemaker. Rather than go through all of them and do a slightly terrible job of lots of things, I wanted to home in on one in particular that I think addresses some really interesting problems for customers. And this is Sagemaker Pipelines. So there's some challenges that go with creating a machine learning lifecycle in a sort of end-to-end view. You know, a lot of people focus in on how do I train the model and get the model exactly right, and that's absolutely something you need to pay attention to. But what does the lifecycle then look like once you've got that model trained in terms of releasing it through a developer environment, a test environment, and a production environment, in terms of running an endpoint where you can do inferences against, and what does that lifecycle look like? Where do I bake in things like validations and checks into that workflow, and how do I work with that? There's a lot of stuff that goes into that kind of pipeline, and that's before you get into things like how do I manage artifacts and the life cycles around those, so individual models and data sources and resources that are used. And then, of course, automating it end-to-end takes a lot of work to get that one right as well. So we heard customers loud and clear on the challenges there, and that led us to go through and create Sagemaker Pipelines. So the goal of Sagemaker Pipelines is to be able to essentially speed up the time it takes for development of machine learning models. So with a few clicks and a little bit of Python, if you wanted to write it out there, you can create a fully automated machine learning pipeline that will help with retraining of your models and publishing of those endpoints for inference. So this could potentially save you months, depending on what it was you were trying to build. It lets you automatically track hundreds of model artifacts. So this is one thing that we're finding from customers who are, they dip the toe in the machine learning pool and figure out, hey, this is cool, it solves a lot of problems for us, let's do more of that. And suddenly you end up with a bit of sprawl that needs to be managed in terms of how those models and versions of those models and other related artifacts are managed. So Sagemaker Pipelines helps us automate some of that. So you can scale through to running thousands of different machine learning models with end-to-end release cycles through to production. So the key things to know about Sagemaker Pipelines, first of all, you can define them in code. So there's a little bit of Python script that you can use to define this pipeline. So Python being a language that's usually pretty familiar to people working in the machine learning space. You can use that same language to define these pipelines. It will let you track the model lineage to support your governance. So I can look at a specific version of a model that's running in production and trace it back through its pipeline to find the individual artifacts and elements that were used to create that endpoint. So this is really important for governance to know, how did I get to a point where this machine learning model is running? That's all baked into the pipelines. You can replay and rerun workflows. So if I need to redeploy something or some sort of transient error had occurred, it's built in to do that. I get a lot of visual tools to see what's going on with the pipeline, so I can go through and build it out with a bit of a GUI, play around with it, and execute from there. You get a central registry of trained models. All right, so having a managed registry service makes it a lot easier to share and reuse specific models in different cases and build them into different pipelines. So this gives me a structured approach to how I want to manage an archive of those models. And lastly, the fully managed ML ops with built-in CI/CD support. So we want to get you to a point where I could potentially do something like update some data sitting in S3 and have that kick off a pipeline that retrains a model that then validates the accuracy of that model. We could go and use other new Sagemaker services like Clarity to do bias validation in that model. And if it passes all of those checks, let's release it into dev and then through the rest of the lifecycle into production. So a couple of visuals to run along with the things we're talking about. So you can see here that it's all baked into Sagemaker Studio, and there's a nice visual representation of what it is that my workflow is doing. So you can see the completed steps and what's in progress. I can select each individual step and see things like the logs and relevant data on what's running and as it's all going through there. You also get that CI/CD process where you can go through then, like I said, operationalize that release to multiple environments and track the status of an individual release instance and where it is throughout that lifecycle. Again, all baked into that same SageMaker Studio UI, so you've got one place to be able to author, train, validate, and then automate the release of your SageMaker models. So this is a fantastic new addition to the SageMaker lineup. Like I said though, just tons of updates for SageMaker. So if you're interested in SageMaker and machine learning, I would highly recommend, if you didn't see it during reInvent, go and have a look at that machine learning keynote, and you'll get a really good summary and figure out where you want to dive deeper through some of those features. The next one I want to talk to is Amazon Code Guru. So it saw a number of different updates, and this service is really growing on me. I'm a really big fan of what this does in terms of improving the quality of code that people are writing. So Code Guru, if you've not heard of it before, is essentially broken into two components. A reviewer, which is designed to analyze your code in a sort of static code analysis powered by machine learning kind of way, and to make recommendations related to performance. The profiler would watch your application as it ran in production and tell you things about long wait times and unexpected performance things that might be occurring that you can then go back and fix in your code. So it gives me a way to try to head off issues before they happen, but then a really deep way to read into what's going on within my application. So in terms of the features that were added to Code Guru, previously it only supported Java apps. So now in preview is support for Python in both the reviewer and the profiler. So if you're running Java apps or Python apps, Code Guru can now jump in and help you optimize the performance of your workloads. The second one was the addition of security detectors. So Code Guru in the reviewer component previously would go through and do a lot of analysis very focused on performance. With the new security detectors, there's a number of different security issues that it can see in your source code and make recommendations on. So yes, there are things related to AWS specific APIs. So for example, if I hard code some IAM credentials into my source code, it's going to pop up and tell me that that's a terrible idea and I should do something else. But it's also going to go through and look for non-AWS things. So in the Java world, for example, say I'm using encryption libraries with a really old cipher. Now, I might think as a developer that I'm doing the right thing because I've pulled the encryption library out and I've used that. But what Code Guru is going to tell me is, hey, that cipher is actually old and there's better options in terms of security and performance, and you should go through and implement that. So you get a lot of different recommendations related to improving the security of your code in that reviewer component. The third new feature that Code Guru got was memory profiling. So the profiler previously would look at things like wait handles and latency on individual functions and hooks inside the JVM runtime. Now, memory profiling is going in there as well, and what it's going to do is help provide you some statistics around the size of the memory heap and the particular types of objects. So basically what this is really looking to help you figure out as a developer is, does my application have a memory leak, or is there unexpected behavior in terms of my memory consumption that I can't necessarily rationalize? So it's going to go through and profile the types of objects that are in that heap and send them through to Code Guru for analysis so that you can get recommendations around, hey, that looks like a memory leak, you should probably go and look at that. So that's Code Guru. And now the last one that I wanted to take you through tonight is Amazon Quicksite Queue. So the challenge here, and there's a bit of a role play because role play is always a fun way to explain stuff. So say Dan and Amy are having a chat and say, hi Dan, I'm trying to compare some sales trends for California versus New York this year, but I couldn't find it in the dashboard. Can you help me get these numbers real quick? Hey Amy, how's it going? Just cut a ticket, we'll get it done eventually. It's kind of urgent. Can we, I need this for the meeting tomorrow. Can you help me out? Well, I'm in the middle of a sprint and I've got a long backlog of ad hoc requests. I'm sure everyone has had some sort of conversation along these lines at some point in their life where you need some information really quickly, but the person who builds the dashboards isn't able to get that for you in a timely fashion. Enter Quicksite Queue. So Quicksite, for anyone who's not familiar with it, is our data visualization platform. So you can connect it to a bunch of different data sources and create all sorts of visualizations designed to make it easier to learn things about the information you have. Quicksite Queue is a new feature added into Quicksite that allows natural language querying of your data. So when I say natural language querying, I mean ask it a question the same as you would ask a human a question. So the key benefits of Quicksite Queue, first of all, that natural language. So you can just ask in plain business terms. I don't need to know a specific query syntax or anything like that to be able to get the data out that I need to answer a question. You can get instant answers. So this isn't ask it a natural question and then wait several hours for a response. It will go away and determine that response for you as quickly as it can right in front of you. You can ask it about all of your data. So you don't need to specify a particular data set or dashboard when you ask it a question. You just ask a question that you're trying to find a response to, and it will figure out what dashboard and data source you're asking a question in relation to. And lastly, you can get started in minutes. It is not hard at all to get this set up. It's a few mouse clicks, particularly if you've already got existing data sets, and then you can be asking all sorts of questions of your data. So to sort of put this in context, I want to lay out a couple of the really hard problems that the team are tackling in terms of providing this kind of functionality. The first one is just generally understanding a query. The second one is then mapping that out to data. So let's say I've got a query which is formatted in a really poor colored font because I didn't click through this. So let me do that and say, show me weekly revenue week over week for California compared to New York in 2020. So you can see I've gone through and highlighted here the individual terms that come up in terms of how Quicksite Queue breaks this out. So weekly gives me an idea of what I'm looking at. Revenue is the data source. Week over week says I'm doing a particular type of comparison. California and New York are things I'm going to filter on, and I'm going to compare those two things that I'm filtering on for a particular time period. So there's a lot of different understanding in there. And when you start thinking about this, it really falls into that hard problem category because there is an infinite number of ways you can ask questions of your data, and that different people who speak with different terminology when we're talking about natural language, it's not going to be a specific syntax in a specific way. So given it's open-ended, inferring intent is really, really challenging. So the second one being data understanding, most people when you define a report will have something that looks a little bit like this. Daily underscore RPT with a bunch of columns that make sense to the person who built the spreadsheet or the data source, but not necessarily to a human. So having a system that can understand the cryptic, dirty, and that oftentimes overlapping things of data, again, is another challenge that the team had to solve in terms of how to make it really easy for a human to just ask a natural question. So what this sort of wrapped out to was the knowledge layer being built under Quicksite Queue. So it's made up of three main components. The first one is intent recognition. So this is essentially the thing that analyzes a sentence like I showed you on the previous slide and pulls out all the different elements of intent within a particular statement. The second one is intent linking. So understanding the different intents in a statement is one thing, but knowing where they're related. So where two things are connected in terms of delivering the final result. So that New York and California and the compared to, there's a graph of where these different intent elements are all connected into each other. Lastly is the data set selection. So based on those different intents, going through and figuring out what are the data sets that I think can be used to answer that particular question. So all of this is built into the knowledge layer that's under the hood of Quicksite Queue. And once that's been figured out, it's handed over to a representation engine. So this will decide based on the type of query you've asked, how do I visualize this? Is it a bar chart? Is it a pie graph? Is it a text statement with a couple of text placeholders baked in there? So there's all sorts of ways that we can represent that data to, at the end of it, spit out a visual that you can use to answer your question. So this is a really long-winded way of saying you can ask a question and just get an answer, and a lot of complicated steps happen between A and B. So on that note, I'm going to hand back over to JJ to wrap up, but that was pretty much the run-through of what we were going to cover off. So here's back to JJ.
Thank you, Brian. So that was our recap list. As we said before, there was hundreds of announcements during reInvent, so there's plenty more content behind that. There's a link down the bottom of the page. What this link has got is a way to look at just the reInvent announcements. You can filter them easily. You can see what was announced in the different keynotes. That machine learning keynote that Brian mentioned as well. You can find out all the releases that were there, and it was raining releases, as Brian was saying, for SageMaker. It was great. One last final shout out. In terms of Quicksite, next month we'll actually have Olivia here doing a bit of a deep dive on Quicksite for us. So if data is your thing, definitely check out next month and we'll go a lot more into what Quicksite can do, and it's quite a bit. And with that, what would you like to hear? We are very, very keen to hear what you'd like to do. One of the things I know you'd like to do, and we'd love to do it too, is get back in person. So we are trying our best to get this event happening in person with everyone and to see your happy, smiley faces. We will keep live streaming when we are back in person, but as soon as we're allowed to, we'll get you in here ASAP. Please submit your feedback. We do read each and every bit of feedback you send in. It's how we actually improve and how we know what you want. So please let us know where you'd like us to do better. I already know I need to do better on my slide work, but feel free to sledge me there anyway. That's fine. And friends don't let friends miss the AWS user group. If you know someone who would like to know a bit more about AWS, tell them to come along. Tell them to tune in. We'd love to see them. We'd love to help them out. And with that, that's it. Thank you very much for joining us this month. Really looking forward to seeing you either virtually or in person next month. And all the best. Thank you.